All right, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Everyone who is here in attendance, you are all muted. So if you have any questions throughout, please feel free to put them in the chat and either I myself will get to them or our presenter will. So my name is Dory Branch. I'm the Associate Director for the Bobcat Career Network in the Ohio University Alumni Association. And we are super excited today to have Dr. Jan Hubenthal from the LGBT Center today to present to us about Safe Zone and Safe Zone in the workplace and how you all can utilize some of the things that he's going to talk about today in your own lives. So like I said, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to throw them in the chat and I will be over there helping to assist, and we'll make sure that we have time to answer all of your questions today. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Jan, and I will let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Tori, and welcome everybody. It's a great pleasure to be able to spend this time with you. As Tori mentioned, my name is Dr. Jan Hubenthal, and I work in the Division of Diversity and Inclusion at Ohio University, specifically in the LGBT Center, where I am the Assistant Director, and I have a bit of a hybrid role. I also teach in the Women's Gender and Sexualities program, so I get to wear lots of different hats. It's a great pleasure to be able to spend this time with you. I've been in my current role for about 1.5 years. So in this time, I've met so many different Ohio University constituents, from our Athens campus to our regional campuses, as well as alumni. And so it's really a pleasure to be able to expand my network and my reach to you today. So today we are here together to participate in the LGBT Center's signature educational curriculum called the Safe Zone Project. We are presenting this curriculum to different Ohio University constituents, from students to staff to faculty to alumni, even to community members. I've done this presentation for Ohio Health, for Holzer, and I've even done it at Casa Nueva, which was a really special experience. So I really get to be in conversation with people all over our Ohio University community. Oh, there we go. I work in the LGBT Center, and I've worked there since 2019. And I came into an office that has existed for a remarkably long amount of time. We are the second oldest LGBT center in the state of Ohio at a university, second only to Ohio State. But whatever, we'll just forget about that. We have existed since 1998 and started as a part-time operation in the Department of Housing and Residence Life. And a fun fact is that our current Dean of Students, or now Interim Vice President for Student Affairs, Jenny Hall-Jones, was one of our first coordinators. So that's a fun fact. And so now we are entering our third decade of existence, serving the Ohio University community. And as a result, we're now 3 full-time staff people in the LGBT Center. And so we've been doing a lot of thinking about what the role of an LGBT Center should be for a 21st century university, and especially for Ohio University. And so we went back and forth and came up with this mission statement. And I won't bore you with all of it, but I wanted to just read just a brief selection here. Our LGBT Center cultivates safe and civil university environments that affirm diverse forms of sexuality, gender identity and expression, and queerness. And so in this brief statement, we have 2 really important words. We have safe and civil. Safety, we all have a kind of, I think, a shared understanding of what safety is, which is, at minimum, the idea that we don't have to live in daily fear for our physical safety. But in the Division of Diversity and Inclusion, and in the LGBT Center specifically, we like to take safety a step further. And we understand it to mean that being safe, feeling safe, means not just feeling physically not in danger of immediate harm, but also feeling included, feeling welcomed, feeling that your identity, your experience, who you are, is valued and celebrated, that you can bring your whole self to work, to school, whatever your context may be. And this is not just a theoretical persuasion of ours, it is based in research. For those of you who are been following Ohio University a little bit over the years, and I'm sure many of you do, you will have noticed that diversity and inclusion is our core value, recently reaffirmed by the presidential strategic pathways. And so diversity and inclusion is not just something that our university likes to talk about and kind of as in a symbolic kind of way, but also something that is directly tied to the educational mission of our university. Research indicates that students who feel welcomed, who feel seen, who feel that their identities are visible and valued and celebrated will perform better academically, report better health outcomes, mental health outcomes, and will in general experience a greater sense of belonging and connection to Ohio University. So diversity and inclusion is really core to our educational mission. And the second word, civil, really is about the fact that we are a public university, right? Which means that we are not beholden to any one dogma, any one religion, any one political direction, any one religion. We have so many different backgrounds and identities and experiences that all come together at Ohio University. That can make for a bit of an explosive mixture at some point, right? We have strong debates, lively debates, and we disagree with each other, sometimes quite vehemently. But the persuasion that we have is that debate is important. Disagreement is important, and that in fact disagreement is the cornerstone of a lively and in fact democratic society, right? But in that debate we have to agree on a certain baseline, and the baseline has to be that we all treat each other with respect and dignity and accept each other for who we are. And so as you listen to this presentation today, I would encourage you to think about how you can foster diversity and inclusion in whatever setting you find yourself, whether that's your community, your family, your workplace, whatever the case may be. Diversity and inclusion is a hot button issue in the 21st century, and certainly in recent weeks and months. And it is so because we have to ask ourselves, what would it take? What does it take for us to foster truly equitable environments in which we can all thrive and grow as fully self-actualized human beings? So what are we doing today? Over the next 50 minutes or so, we're going to be pursuing 3 interrelated goals. Number 1, we're going to start thinking about how your own identities, who you are, may inform how you interact with others, right? So much of diversity and inclusion work is at its core introspective, right? Reflecting on who you are, what you bring to the table, what are your privileges, your assumptions, your ways of looking at the world that inform how you encounter others. Number 1, on a more basic level, you will understand and embrace LGBTQ terminology and experiences. Sometimes when I do these presentations, I get the impression that there is a notion out there that unless you already know everything about these issues, whether that you can speak fluently and knowledgeably about LGBTQ issues, that you've somehow missed the boat and that you're not really in the know and what is wrong with you is often the tacit assumption, right? And so our education, our educational philosophy really pursues a very different agenda, thinking that this is a really a judgment-free zone where we're all learning and allowed to ask questions, even if we may feel that we're the only person in the room who doesn't yet know. And let me tell you, that is not the case. We all have things that we don't know. And number 3, I would like you to think about how you can intentionally and thoughtfully offer support to LGBTQ people in your communities and workplaces. So here we go. I always like to start by really going back to basics. I have mentioned the acronym LGBTQ a number of times already. And so let me just explain what that means. LGB stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual. Lesbian is a term used for folks who identify as women who are romantically or sexually attracted to other women. Gay is a term for folks who identify as men who are romantically and sexually attracted to other folks who identify as men. I would fall under that category. And B, the B stands for bisexual, which is a term that refers to people of any gender identity who are not attracted to people of one gender, but who have the potential to be romantically and sexually attracted to people of more than one gender. Now, LGB refers to sexuality, right? The idea of romantic, sexual, even platonic in some ways, attraction. The T is a little bit different. The T refers to gender identity. I think we've all heard the word transgender, right? That's a word that is very commonly used. But I think it's important to understand what it really means at its core. The word transgender means that it was used to refer to people whose gender identity differs from the one they were assigned at birth. Whose gender identity differs from the one they were assigned at birth. So that could mean that, for example, someone is assigned female at birth, and then later grows up to realize I am a boy or a man and takes steps to transition towards that gender identity. But it could also mean that somebody does not identify either as the gender they were assigned at birth or another binary gender distinction, but identifies somewhere in the middle. Transgender is an incredibly vast umbrella term that encompasses all kinds of gender identities. And the word queer is an umbrella term that encompasses all of it, that does not denote any one particular identity, but that can refer to all kinds of identities that are not straight and not cisgender. Cisgender is the opposite of transgender. And I'll be talking a little bit more about the history of the word queer later. I think so much of creating an LGBTQ inclusive environment begins with the way in which we introduce ourselves. We have this protocol in the LGBT Center that whenever someone comes into our space whom we have not met before, we have this guideline in place. We say, hello, my name is Jan. My pronouns are he, him, his. How are you? And in that moment, I've extended a tacit invitation to that person to respond in kind. Let me take a step back and talk to you a little bit about what pronouns are. I would assume that the vast majority of people on the call today and the vast majority of people you know identify with what we call binary gender pronouns. He, him, his for folks who identify as men or on the male end of the gender spectrum, or she, her, hers for folks who identify as women or on the female end of the gender spectrum. So that's, I think, very commonly understood. A pronoun, think of it as the smallest common denominator of how we refer to other people in gender terms. So we know both of these pronouns, but there are in fact other pronouns as well that do not fall into that binary gender distinction. Chief among them is the singular they, them, theirs, which is used for folks who do not identify either as men or as women, but who identify as somewhere in between, right? Whose gender identity kind of resides in a place that is somewhere between those two gender identities. Sometimes I hear people respond to the singular they by saying, well, that seems like a fad. I don't think we had that in the 90s or 80s or 70s. So this is maybe just something that's going to pass. And to that, I am now trained to respond that as a faithful NPR listener, I listened to a piece about Jane Austen and her novels and how she in fact used the gender neutral they in her novels. So this is a really good example for us to consider that language always changes and evolves, right? And that even remnants of words we use today can in fact be traced to earlier language uses. There are other pronouns as well. There's sie, here, here's, sie, theirs, theirs, or sie, them, theirs. I will be completely transparent and tell you that I've yet to meet someone who affirmatively claims these pronouns for themselves. But I leave them on here because I think it's important for us to remember that the ways in which people identify and experience their sense of self is subject to constant change, right? Our identity evolves, the way we talk about our experiences changes. And so I think it's important to keep kind of an open mind to the fact that language changes and evolves. Why does this matter? When I share my pronouns with you, I say, my name is Jan. I use he, him, his pronouns. How are you? I communicate three things with you. Number one, I let you tell me how you want to be called, right? I am giving you the power to tell me how you would like to be called rather than me claiming that right for myself. Number two, I signal to you that I do not make assumptions about who you are. This is the big one. I think as human beings, we are in some ways hardwired to make assumptions about people. Arguably, it's how we've evolved as a species, right? Making assumptions about what food is edible and what food is going to kill us. That's an assumption that's based on prior experience, right? And so we classify things. It's in some ways how our synapses connect, right? But when it comes to gender and sexuality, the challenge I'm going to pose to you is to push back against that innate classifying instinct. Because gender and sexuality are not things that follow easy categorization and not always something that is immediately present, something that you can immediately discern. Someone's gender identity, someone's inner sense of self may in fact be very different from the way they present or look to others. And lastly, by sharing my pronouns with you, I communicate that it is safe for you to be yourself with me. And there we, again, have that word safety, right? I communicate that this is a safe space where you can be yourself without fear of judgment, without fear of ostracism, without fear of ridicule. And this is really important. Now, the reason why we do these presentations all over the Ohio University community and all over really our region is simple. Our LGBT Center has a very rich and storied history, a very proud history. We are proud to work at a university that prioritizes and funds diversity and inclusion initiatives in a way that other universities of a similar caliber often do not. But we're also aware that our LGBT Center is a wonderful space, but it's only 800 square feet. Right? So it is a quite small space. So we don't want our students and our community members just to feel safe and affirmed there. We want to take the good news outside, right? And ensure that Ohio University's campuses and environments are LGBTQ affirming in all spaces, whether that's classrooms, residence halls, offices, dining halls, so on and so forth, right? And so we want to cultivate what we call networks of support that we understand to consist of networks of allies. Now, the word ally is something you may have heard about, right? The concept of ally really is the cornerstone of a safe zone training. An ally, the most commonly understood definition of an ally, is someone who is not part of the LGBTQ community, but somebody who supports that community, who's going to stand up for that community, someone who's going to go to bat for that community, right? But allyship, in our understanding, is a great deal more nuanced. And I will take myself as an example here. I identify as a gay man, and so I am part of the LGBTQ plus community, right? But does that mean that by virtue of being part of that vast umbrella, that vast acronym, that I am able to empathize with and understand and intimately experience the experiences of everyone else who's in that community, my lesbian friends, my bi friends, my trans friends, so on and so forth? Certainly not, right? So what empathy comes down to, regardless of your personal identity, is empathy. Allyship is about empathy. And empathy is a skill that basically means the ability to reflect on who you are and imagine what someone else's experiences may be like, and to practice a form of understanding and empathy. That's really what it's about. So it's really important to understand that even though today we're talking about gender and sexuality, and that is the purview of today's presentation, it's probably why you are here today. At the same time, it's important to remember that gender and sexuality, these identities do not exist in a vacuum, right? And in fact, all of us are made up of a vast multiplicity of identities that make up who we are, and that determine and inform how we experience our lives. That could be related to our racial identity, our ethnic belonging, our socioeconomic status, whether we have a disability, our national origin, our veteran status, our maternity status, our educational status, so on and so forth, right? So we are made up of a lot of different identities that intersect with one another. The theory of intersectionality is something that has informed this understanding and has particularized that understanding. So just keep that in mind, that everyone's experience is really informed by all the identities they bring to the table and is not reducible to their gender and sexuality. This is an activity that is impractical to do in this setting, so I won't, but I will narrate it for just 1 second. If we were in the same physical space, maybe perhaps gathered around a conference table, I would have index cards for you. And I would pass these index cards out. And at this point in the training, I would ask you to engage in a little bit of introspection and think about the 3 most important things in your life. What is the essence of you? What are the 3 essential things about you, right? And people write down any number of things. Sometimes they write about their hometowns. A lot of people write about their spouses, their families, their kids. A lot of people write about their dogs too. I would probably write about a dog if I had one, right? And so, and then I ask folks, and I don't look at those responses, by the way, they're completely confidential. And so I ask folks to turn the card over and then turn to their partner, the person who sits next to them, and introduce themselves to that person. The catch is that they cannot mention anything that they just wrote down on the card. And so you can imagine that these conversations are brief. They are superficial and they feel emotionally dishonest, right? They feel as though I am withholding really important information because of some external arbitrary rule, because that guy told me, right? There is an external force that is telling you that you have to withhold that information. And so this activity is a bit of a clumsy simulation of what it might feel like to be in the closet, right? Excuse me. Always got to hydrate in these virtual environments. Hydration is important. So coming out is a metaphor that we have used to describe the first in a series of moments where LGBTQ people first share with the world who they are, who they love, right? And coming out is many things, but one of the things that it is a lifelong process. When you are LGBTQ, you have to come out over and over and over again over the course of your life. And that is because in the gender studies world, we say that's because we live in a heterosexist world. And all that means is that the default assumption in our culture is that everyone is straight and everyone is cisgender, right? So coming out is something that has to happen over and over again whenever you meet a new group of friends, whenever you get a new job, whenever you meet people that you have not met before. And I think it's important to understand, especially in the context of our conversation today, that there are a million reasons for why people don't come out about their sexual or gender identity. That could be related to fears for their physical safety, which is something that is a concern in many countries around the world and in many areas of the United States. It could be related to fear of rejection, ostracism, and it also has to do with fears for professional consequences. You may be familiar with the Human Rights Campaign. It's one of the largest LGBTQ rights organizations in the US. And I was privileged enough to hear one of their directors who works on workplace equality issues speak. And he asked the question to the audience and asked, who do you think is more likely to be closeted at work? Do you think it's younger people or do you think it's older people? And everyone in the audience said, well, of course it's older people, right? Because they grew up in a time that was more repressive and they still carry that with them, so they're not out at work. But he said, in fact, that the opposite was true, that younger LGBTQ people are more likely to be closeted at work. Because, he said, the perception is that they have more to lose, right? Climbing the career ladder is hard enough as it is. Why make yourself vulnerable or put yourself at a disadvantage, perceived or real, by coming out? And so this is, I think, an important concept to keep in mind, that as we talk about fostering an LGBTQ and inclusive workspace, we really need to do the hard work of realizing that LGBTQ folks do not deserve to be disadvantaged and to correct that perception. So coming out is really the first moment in a lifelong process. I will be transparent again. I came out to my mom when I was 15 years old. So this was a long time ago. I'm 32 now. So I've been out over half of my life. And when I tell you today, albeit in this virtual setting, that I'm gay, I don't feel, my palms don't sweat anymore and my heart doesn't race anymore and I don't feel like I'm about to faint. But I used to. And my experience in some ways is very typical of other LGBTQ youth who often experience a great sense of emotional distress over having to come out. I'm also typical in the sense that I was very lonely in school. I didn't have a lot of friends. I didn't really feel that the other kids in my class were particularly friendly or nice to me. And as a result, I was very, very lonely, right? And so there is an incredibly strong correlation between poor mental health outcomes and LGBTQ identity. And that is a trend that does not disappear when we graduate high school, right? And so folks who feel marginalized, it's not just a feeling, but it has a really tangible effect on one's quality of life, but also on one's chances for success in the workplace. Now, transitioning is a bit of a different story. It does not have to do with sexual orientation necessarily, but it has to do with realizing that one's gender identity that we were assigned at birth is different from the one that we have, and taking either legal, social, or medical ways to bring our identity in more close alignment with our outward appearance or our legal documentation. And so I often get asked by folks, what is something, when someone comes out to me, either I'm a teacher or I am an advisor or, whatever the case may be, how do I do that? How do I do that when someone tells me that they're gay or bi or trans, whatever the case may be? And you know what I tell them? I tell them, start by saying thank you. Thank you for honoring me with your confidence. When someone comes out to you, you can pat yourself on the back. It means that you are a good friend. You are a trusted adult, right? You're somebody who seems trustworthy, someone who can, be trusted in a delicate situation. And the next step should always be asking, how can I support you? What can I do for you, right? Are you afraid of telling mom and dad? Is there something else in your life that I can help you with? I could tell you, as an LGBTQ person, having somebody offer support is often the most meaningful thing you can do. And the most important thing, well, one of the important things, is always clarify whether this is just a you and me conversation, like in our little circle of trust, or is this general knowledge, right? Some people come out in really very visible and obnoxious ways. This guy who lived on my freshman hall, he came out by posting, a poster in the men's bathroom. I am gay, and I don't remember, but it was quite visible and very obnoxious. But not very many people do that, right? Some people just take little bitty itty steps out of the closet, while others just burst the doors wide open. Okay, so, and of course, coming out and individual experiences are coming out are embedded in a larger political and cultural context. And so I think it's important for us to appreciate the incredible moment in which we find ourselves, at which certain things are going really, really well, but challenges and vulnerabilities persist as well. So on the positive side, there are so many things that are going well. The fact that I'm here talking to you about LGBTQ issues is a really big deal, right? Probably would not have happened 10 years ago, certainly not 15 or 20 years ago. So the fact that we're having this conversation, that there's an interest on your part in creating an LGBTQ inclusive workspace is really something, right? It's really something. LGBTQ folks have an increased presence in the media. You just saw Laverne Cox, who was the first transgender woman of color to win a Primetime Emmy Award for her work on Orange is the New Black. Representation matters, right? Visibility is important. When you see your experience, someone who looks like you on television, that means a lot. Discriminatory laws and practices have gone down locally, nationally, and even internationally. Botswana just decriminalized homosexuality a few short months ago. So progress is happening all around the globe. And of course, right here in the US, we've had some monumental legal decisions that have improved the lives of hundreds of thousands of LGBTQ Americans in recent times. Such as Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, which was a rule written into law by President Bill Clinton in 1994 that prohibited service members from disclosing their sexual identity to others and prohibited others from asking about it. It was kind of a moratorium of silence. Marriage equality is the law of the land. In a case called Obergefell v. Hodges, the Supreme Court ruled in 2015 that the right to marry was a constitutional right, and statewide conversion therapy bans are becoming more and more common. Conversion therapy is a widely discredited psychological practice to turn LGBTQ youth straight or cisgender. But we have to remember that there are ongoing struggles and challenges that we have to be attuned to. And it's important, I think, to remember where we are, at least those of us who are located in Ohio. LGBTQ people in Ohio have very few legal protections in place that protect them against discrimination in public accommodation, healthcare, or housing. So in many municipalities that have not passed their own anti-discrimination ordinances, it is entirely legal for a landlord not to want to rent somebody because of their gender identity or sexual orientation. Just yesterday, we spent a few hours working with a graduate student who lives in Athens, and or just outside of Athens, I believe, and whose landlord is uncomfortable because he's living with his partner, and one of the neighbors complained, and now he's trying to evict them. So these things are alive and well. Same with healthcare. There is no state or federal law that prohibits discrimination in healthcare. I came to Ohio University from the College of William and Mary, where I completed my PhD in American Studies, and I wrote my dissertation about HIV/AIDS activism history. And one of the most astounding statistics that I discovered in my research is that if current patterns persist, if nothing changes, then 1 in 2 African-American gay men will contract HIV within his lifetime. 1 in 2. That's 50%, which is an astounding number, considering that we, I think by and large, live at a time when we think that HIV is a thing of the past, right? We don't really think a lot about AIDS anymore in the way that we used to in the 80s and 90s. But what this tells us is that there are enormous racial disparities when it comes to access to healthcare, as well as an enormous stigma that can surround homosexuality. And so this is not a nationwide issue necessarily, but it is concentrated in certain pockets of the rural South, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Georgia, so on and so forth, where those racial discrimination really abounds. And lastly, in the US today, transgender women of color have an average life expectancy of only 35 years. Only 35 years. And when I talk about transgender women of color, I mean both Black transgender women and non-Black trans women of color, including Latinx folks. And so why is that? And I think this is where it's important to remember the intersections. When we talk about transgender women of color, we're talking about the idea of multiple marginalization. A trans woman of color is not just a woman of color, but she is a trans woman of color. And all 3 of these identities are discriminated against, are marginalized in all kinds of ways. And so I would encourage you to think about what it means for someone like me, who's a white, upper middle class, educated gay man, to belong to the LGBTQ community, and then also have folks whose only method of sustenance and survival is often either sex work or drug work because of social discrimination. We really have to think about how we can advocate and practice empathy for all members of our community. By the way, in June of this year, the Supreme Court ruled that employment discrimination against LGBTQ folks was unconstitutional. So we now have a blanket standard across the land. But before prior to June, this is what the map looked like. There was an incredible hodgepodge of different anti-discrimination laws. So that's another feather in our cap, I suppose. After this training, you will receive a follow-up email with a core vocabulary handout that details some of the most important terms and concepts related to LGBTQ identities. If you've ever wondered what the difference between transgender and genderqueer is, for example, that will be a great one. And so I have compiled, for your benefit, a list of top 6 words that we used to say, but that we don't really say anymore. So this is not an effort to police your language or to tell you what you can and cannot say, but rather it is to give you the tools to use inclusive and affirming language. Number 1, transgendered. No. That's not something we say anymore. We just say transgender or simply trans. Homosexual is a word we don't like anymore. We say gay. And the reason why we don't like it anymore is because up until 1971, the word homosexual was a diagnosis listed in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association. So you could be diagnosed as a homosexual, and a course of treatment could be prescribed, mostly consisting of psychotherapy, right? So homosexual has a very very clinical, very medical history and connotation. So we're just trying to transition to the word gay. She's a transgender, he's a queer. In general, folks, when we talk about people, we prefer adjectives to nouns, right? Let me just say that the word queer likewise has a bit of a complicated history where it has historically often been used as a pejorative, as a homophobic slur, right? So there are people, especially gay men who are a little bit older than me, about a generation removed, who would never in a million years use the word use the word queer to describe themselves, because they have those painful memories of having that word hurled at them. Some people enjoy queer because, as I mentioned earlier, it is a non-specific term that is just an umbrella that says, rather than claiming one particular subject position, such as I'm a lesbian, I'm bi, I'm gay, whatever the case may be, you could just say I'm queer, right? And leave people guessing a little bit. In general, as a good rule, I would recommend waiting for someone to identify themselves as queer before using that term. Born female or born male is something that we're trying to phase out in favor of assigned female and male at birth. And that is because today, in really all of our work, we are talking about identity. We are talking about ways to support people in the way in which they identify themselves. What born female and born female, what these turns of phrases suggest, is that there is an immutable, eternal, essentialist basis for gender, right? That you were born a certain way and that is your identity from the moment you were born. And so this is not to deny the existence of sexual characteristics, but it's rather to say that identity is something that does not inhere in a person's body, but that inheres in their soul. So imagine a baby being born, right? Ideally, when the baby is born, it is healthy, screaming, but babies don't really have much of an identity, I'm comfortable saying, right? Babies are just blobs, very cute blobs in most cases, right? Screaming, healthy blobs, but they don't really have a sense of this is who I am, right? Identity is something that comes much later. And so the ways in which doctors and healthcare professionals make the determination whether to cross off the M or the F on a birth certificate is based on genitalia, right? And in the vast majority of cases, those decisions turn out to be pretty good guesses, right? The majority of people who are assigned male or female at birth grow up to be to have an identity that is consistent with that assignment. But a considerable portion of the population does not, right? So by using the word assign, we are calling attention to the agentive element of gender assignment. And so when we think about sex, I think we are used to thinking of it in binaries, right? To think that there is either a biological sex for being female or a biological basis for being male. But research tells us that it is actually quite common that up to 1.7% of all live births in the US are to children who are intersex. Intersex is, again, another umbrella term that refers to chromosomal and genital ambiguity. So that could mean a child born with testicles and a vagina, or a penis and a uterus. Mother Nature has all kinds of variations that she can visit upon people, right? And historically, and I think still to this day, though to a lesser extent, doctors would make quick surgical interventions, right, to reestablish that clarity and to tell the new parents, oh, don't worry, everything is fine. Your baby's healthy. We just need to make a quick intervention, or we need to make a quick correction, sometimes even without telling the parents, right? And these kinds of interventions would have often really grave consequences, where we had people growing up who were thoroughly depressed, feeling that there was something wrong with them, and then discovering later on what had been done to them. To this day, the emerging standard of care is to avoid unnecessary and irreversible surgeries on children with intersex conditions. If the child grows up and surgery is warranted and desired, then that's a different conversation. But medically unnecessary, irreversible surgeries in the interest of a clear gender and sexual identity is something that is being more and more discouraged. Okay, I think since we are running out of time just a little bit and I want to have time to be in conversation with you, I wanted to share with you, for those of you who are interested in creating an LGBTQ inclusive space, whether that's in your community or in your workplace, these are 8 tips to help you do that. I would say that these are the ultimate tips, but they're really just my tips. But I am what you get today, so I guess there you go. They're my ultimate tips. Number 1, know the power of names and pronouns. This is incredibly important. When someone tells you what their name is and what their pronouns are, even if that person has an outward appearance in a way that does not seem to match your assumptions about gender and sexuality, take that as gospel. Take it as gospel, even if your instincts tell you otherwise. I think it was Maya Angelou who said, when someone tells you who they are, believe them the first time. Though it was slightly a different context, but I think the core sentiment is true here. Give people the power and the freedom to identify themselves to you. However, I think you should be thoughtful about asking people how they would like to be called. A great way, rather than asking, is introducing yourself with your pronouns. For instance, if you are a healthcare professional, right, and you meet a new patient for the first time, you could just say, "Hi, I'm Dr. Hubenthal. I use he, him, his pronouns. How are you?" I'm not a medical doctor, by the way. Don't get it confused. But I think that's a great way of signaling openness and to have a confidential conversation if that person is at a point where they're ready to have that conversation. Number 3, do not make assumptions about gender or sexual identity, right? Make sure that you keep an open mind. The LGBTQ community is diverse, and we are made up of so many different people who look and act and feel different. So make sure that you keep an open mind. Number 4, allyship matters. Know that visibility matters. If we were together at the conclusion of this training, I would hand each of you kind of a Safe Zone card. It looks like this. This is an Ohio Safe Zone. You see Baker Center in the background. And we encourage people to hang this card on their office doors or to affix them to the back of their laptop. So if they have a wall, to affix it there, and thereby signaling to folks who are LGBTQ, this is a safe space. You can talk to me. It may seem like a small thing, but I can tell you, we notice, we see it, and it matters. Practice using gender-neutral language. This is a big one. It's a bit of a challenge. Our language, when you think about it, is actually quite gendered. So you could, rather than about asking about a brother or sister, you could ask about a sibling. Rather than asking about mom or dad, you could ask about a parent, or rather than asking about a girlfriend or boyfriend, or husband and wife, you could ask about a partner. This may not matter to you personally very much, but I think it's one way in which we can practice active empathy, right? It may not matter to you, but it might matter a great deal to others. Educate yourself about LGBTQ+ resources in your community, right? Is there a community center that caters to LGBTQ folks? Is there a counselor that you know who is LGBTQ affirming in case you encounter someone who needs help kind of navigating their journey? Sometimes it only takes one supportive person to connect folks to the resources that they need in order to be well and do well in life. Number 7, use your power and voice and speak up for others. This is a big one, right? So whether you are in a position of leadership in your organizations, in your workplace, sometimes it means the world, oftentimes it means the world for when these critical conversations about sensitive language use, about perhaps changing policies, about moving an organization to adopt an overtly LGBTQ affirming stance, by, for example, honoring Pride Month in June. It's often really powerful when those impulses do not have to come from LGBTQ people themselves, but from allies. So think about who you are. What are the power that you have by virtue of your identity and your position? How can you use that voice for good? Now that I've bombarded you with all these rules, I think this is the most important rule. Be patient with yourself and others. We are all on this learning journey together. I think learning is a lifelong process, especially when it comes to diversity and inclusion. There will never be a time at which our work is done and the world is sufficiently inclusive and diverse, right? So make sure that you keep an open mind, that you keep learning and keep demonstrating the openness that you have demonstrated by being here today. And also remember that none of us are perfect. We're all human beings and we're flawed and we're gonna mess up. We're gonna say the wrong thing. And I say the wrong thing all the time. I mess up all the time. What matters is not messing up, because that's human. What matters is realizing that you have messed up, apologizing if an apology is warranted, being open to critique and conversation, moving on, and trying to do a little bit better next time. That's all anyone can ask of you. And so with that, I wanted to thank you for spending this time with me today. I've really appreciated your attention and your presence here. And you may now consider yourself safe zone trained, and I hope that we can all get together at some point in the future. And I would be very happy to answer any thoughts or respond to any thoughts or questions you may have. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so thank you everyone for being here. If you have any questions, please throw them in the chat. I know that we have a few, so Jan, I'll give you maybe a chance to scroll through some of those. And thank you all for your participation. I think what Jan was talking about, practicing and forgiving yourself and learning. I've been through this training a few times with Jan, and it's so true. I still am practicing and trying things and trying to get better. And one of the things that I know that I've done, for example, is like, instead of, we talked about not assuming gender. So I kind of use the they, them as more of a plurality until I know someone's pronouns, because that kind of feels a little bit safer, right? So there's different ways to kind of try and make, try out what makes you feel comfortable, but also make sure that you're acknowledging other people's comfort in the room. And it's okay to feel a little awkward about it at times and try new things. So I think that apologizing and practicing with people who you already know is always a great place to start too.
Absolutely. So I'm seeing one question from Susie. Susie asked, at some point, could you address why the center is the LGBT Center without the Q in the acronym? Susie, that is an incredibly good question. And I think the answer is not very satisfying. It is rooted really in how institutional processes work. And when the LGBT Center was founded, that was the common language. It takes a certain amount of work and a lot of administrative follow through to change a name, but it is on our radar, and I think the Q should absolutely be included. So thank you for that. I will be happy to share the slides later. Maybe you could connect me with Susie, and I would be happy to share those slides.
Yeah. And the recording will be made available on our website.
Oh, perfect. Perfect.
Access. Yeah.
Kyle, how can I handle a situation where a student in class expresses that it is their sincerely held religious or cultural belief that it's wrong to be gay or that transgender people don't exist? Well, this is a very complicated question, and I think that's one that's certainly hotly debated in our time. I think that everyone is entitled to their beliefs and their opinions. I think let's start there, right? So you can privately believe whatever you want. But when we think about educational context, I think we have a duty as educators to make sure that our spaces are safe and affirming. Everyone has the right to a safe education. And so I would file that under agree to disagree. It is not something that I would necessarily debate as strongly as I may feel about these things. And I would imagine that you feel similarly. But I think it's important in that context to say you are entitled to your opinion and to your beliefs. And I'm not here to question them. But right here, we are recognizing and honoring and accepting everyone's identity. Oh, Dr. Harkins, would it be possible to receive a Safe Zone card via mail? It would absolutely be possible. We have limited access to our physical space right now, but perhaps there is a way to connect Dr. Harkins with me, and I will certainly write down your email, and I think Susie Hooser asked about it as well. I will certainly and gladly put that on my list and do it as soon as I can.
How about this? If everyone who would like to receive a card, I'm going to go ahead and throw my email in the chat. We'll compile a list of everybody. If you could just send me your name and your address, and then I'll compile all of that for Jan, and then I'll send that off to him so he can manage to get those all out to you if you are interested in having a Safe Zone card to display in your space.
Yes.
I love that everyone wants a card and wants to be able to show off safe space for people in their lives and in their communities. So thank you all for.
And it's also so awesome with Baker Center in the background. I think it's quite picturesque too, regardless of the message.
Very true. And I mean, you're all still Ohio Bobcats and creating that Ohio safe space. So we appreciate that.
That's right.
Awesome. All right. Well, with that, if anyone has any other questions, we still have a little bit of time. Please feel free to throw them in the chat. But I just want to say again, we appreciate you all being here. And I want to thank Dr. Jan Hubenthal again for doing this for our alumni. It's so great to have such a great colleague and friend who is able to come on and talk about this information with people who obviously are very excited to learn more. So we appreciate you all being here, and I appreciate Jan for being here as well. So thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to shoot me an email or Jan an email, and we will be happy to speak to those later. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.